Hi everybody, so this is another commission speed paint video. The difference here being that I'm actually going to explain the things that are going on a little bit more. First of all, I start by filling in the characters with a completely solid color. It doesn't matter what color since you're going to be changing it later anyway, and if the characters are far enough away then usually I just put them on the same, but since they're so close I don't want them overlapping too much, so that's why I put them on two different ones. And then after that, once that's done, comes the meticulous process of, getting everything within the lines. So while I'm doing that, I wanted to take a second to say that this is a Patreon sponsored video. And if you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, the more I'll have to work on, videos that you pretty much subscribe for, as opposed to doing commissions to pay the bills and stuff like that. But just so you know, I am working on another animation meme for JD. I took a poll on my Tumblr to see which one people would be interested in seeing, and that came in on Wednesday, so that one should be out this weekend. And I'm also got most of the thumbnails down, or not most of, I got some thumbnails down for the Meant to Be Yours animatic, so that should be coming up as soon as I can finish it as well. I'm hoping to get that out in not this weekend, but maybe a couple weekends after that. So if you're interested, please check out my Patreon, because the more people that are on there, the less I'll have to worry about bills, and who knows, someday if it's funded enough, I can make making videos my full-time job and make cooler and cooler, higher production videos and all that stuff. Once the base colors are down, then I use clipping masks on top of those bases to fill in the flat colors. Again, you want to get towards the colors that you want, but in truth you can change colors at any given moment. Clipping masks are something that I almost always use unless I'm just randomly just doing a random sketch. Even then, I'll probably usually do a transparency lock, which you'll see that I do a couple times in here. That's basically kind of like a clipping mask, except you're painting just within the layer specifically and not making any more layers. So for example, on, her dress, if it was a transparency lock, then I could make it pink without it going up more into her skin or anything, because that specific layer, transparency means if part of it is at 0%, it's gonna stay at 0%, so you can change anything that has, color in it. Or, if you have a layer that's painted at 50%, then it's gonna stay at 50%, but you can still change it. If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if that's the best way of explaining it, but that's the best way that I can think of explaining it. So basically I go through and then I fill all those in, and with hair, usually I'll add a couple of loose strands like you'll see that are included in the line art, because those sort of little flyaways I feel are better just on the inked layer, because then they're the color of the hair itself and not the ink. I also use a different brush to line than I do when I'm coloring. I will link both the tool preset that I use for my line art, as well as link to the download for the oil painting brush that I'll use on the background, which you'll see coming up here in a little bit. And yeah, so basically just doing a whole bunch of this. This video is going both faster and slower than I thought it was going to be. I thought that whole little speech was going to take me until the boy was also filled in. I guess to give you some backstory, this is basically an X-Men AU that of a friend of mine's. So I drew the other two pictures to the side as well. I will also link that below because they worked very hard on it and I love them very much and I love drawing it. And you should go check it out because it's cool if you have a Tumblr. Obviously not everyone has a Tumblr, but even if you don't, you can look at it, so that's cool. Oh, but basically the way you use clipping masks is that you have your layer, then you make a new layer or have a different layer, and then just right click, create clipping mask, and that's basically it. And then, you know, put whatever you want in there. And then transparency lock is just the little grid button above it right there. And so if you lock that, then you basically can just like color within there, just within the layer itself. So yeah. And then when it comes to, almost done filling this guy in, but he obviously, well, has freckles, and I don't really make brushes too much, but for this I did, as a brush that I have saved for freckles, and it's basically just take a regular brush and then increase the spacing all the way and just like mess with the filters so like they spread out everywhere, and you know, basically just mess around with it, and you know, you can increase the sizes and the opacity, and I don't really mess with texture all too much, but still I think it gets the point across for what freckles are supposed to be. But for the most part, if anything that you see that I use that is not just like a regular, just like flat brush, it's more than likely something I find. Like there's so many of them that you can get, just like I probably even could have found a freckle brush, just Photoshop freckle brushes, and it would have brought something up. But I've been using this one for a while. I use it a lot. Basically anytime a character has freckles like JD. And yeah, and it serves its purpose anyway. And then for this, for the tears, it's not really anything too complicated. It's just, you know, white for the tears, and then erasing at like 50% opacity to make it, because you know, tears are clear, they're liquid, but you want them to show up a little bit, so it's sort of finding that balance for whatever kind of tears that you're going for. And then in a second we get to the fun bit, which isn't really with backgrounds, they aren't really like the thing that I'm best at. Like I enjoy doing them, but it's not that I'm proficient. So obviously I have a reference image both for color and just, you know, an idea of what a graveyard looks like. They're at a funeral, obviously, in case you didn't, in case that wasn't obvious. So adjusting slightly to where I want it to be, but the oil brush that I mentioned linking below is basically when I paint, I do it all on one layer, and it's something, you know, if you watch the Futurama speed paint video, like all of that was pretty much done on one layer except for a couple of things. For the most part, whenever I do painting things like this, and I think with most people who do digital painting, it's just helps when it comes to blending, just to create those shapes and then just like refine them and like squish them around all within one layer. I'm not gonna say it's more natural that way, but it is an entirely different way of thinking than the way that I color characters. And so with that, it's basically just playing around with it, you know, as you can see, like erasing. You don't really use an eraser, you just paint over with a different color, so in that case the gray, until it starts to slowly eventually take the shapes that you want, and you know, you put in building blocks and you just like squish stuff around it, and it's a lot of fun. I really love doing it a lot more than I used to. It's certainly just something that I've come across more within the last couple of years, and with this brush in particular I had a lot of fun. You'll see I'll post a couple of examples of things that I did with it recently, and like all of these were all done on one layer, and just as practice paintings that I did within, like, each of them was like 20 to 30 minutes, I think, at most. And that would be my biggest recommendation to you, to anyone, like, to use references of some variety. I didn't use them on these, but just to understand the lighting, and just, I don't know, it's fun. It's less stressful than having to worry about line art, I feel, and it's good practice. So but yeah, so basically just the background is all painted in, as you can see, completely different process than how I was coloring in the rest of it, which was pretty clean cut and flat, like digital color. The last major things I wanted to talk about, which I guess is actually a majority of the actual coloring aspect of it, is the Radial gradient tool, the lightness on the hue and saturation, some layer masks, and like level adjusting. So pretty much all the post-production of the actual illustration. The gradient tool, which you can find underneath the paint bucket tool, is basically something to make it all look kind of like softer, and that's when I start using like multiply and overlay to, like, you can see the blend layer modes where you can see at the top of the that list of layers to the right, where, multiply obviously makes everything underneath it darker, and screen makes everything sort of like brighter and stuff like that. And for the lightness thing, we're going to want to take hue and saturation under edit adjustments, image adjustments, hue and saturation, or control U, and basically just drag the lightness factor down, and it makes everything look, obviously much darker just as a whole entire group. And you can either multiply that layer or not, and which point from there, that's when you do the whole layer mask thing, where basically black erases everything, and then white will put it all back, and so you can cut into it and take away from it as much as you want without actually affecting the actual layer because of the mask that's on top of it. And so you'll see in my example, but within the illustration, like everything that has been darkened, I can cut into with the original lighter color underneath to make that sort of backlighting that I've been doing in like a majority of my illustrations recently. Just because I like the way that it makes sort of the colors pop, I suppose, but also just because even in the context of this, I feel it's more atmospheric. But yeah, so you'll see cutting away into the layer mask to, I believe, rim light is the technical term, and then with the gradient tool sort of fading a bit more light, so it's like the hard highlights, and then just more softly blending all of those in. I'll admit most of my lighting isn't super precise, but I like to think it gets the point across. And the same can apply too, is where if you wanted to have it where you just want the shadows and you don't want most of it to be dark, you can still adjust the lightness, and then put a layer mask over and fill it completely with black, and then use white to highlight the parts that you want to bring back the darkness. And yeah, and then just the last bit of using another brush, which I believe is also in the same pack that I linked the background brush to, just to give an added bit of texture to it. Oftentimes too, you can also just like search like old paper texture and adjust that as you need it. And usually multiply or overlay, basically all those layer effects is fun to just scroll through just to see what works best, because it's not always the same. Sometimes things that you would never think to use end up looking best. So I just encourage everyone to experiment and just see what fits, and then, at the end I just do the general hue, lightness, and yeah, and then it all comes together at the very end. So hopefully that has some things that help. I cut the video off before I actually finished drawing the leaves, but you'll see the leaves in a second. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I know these videos aren't super popular compared to the other significantly shorter ones, but if any of you are still here, I very much appreciate it, and I love you very much, and I will be working to post as many videos as I can soon. Hope you enjoyed, and if you have any direct questions for me about how I do certain things, I will be trying to make these more kind of videos and hopefully improve on how I make them over time. So yeah, love you. Bye.